Okay. So it's my immense pleasure to introduce our host, Charlie. He is the author of four books, including The Star of Tonight, Interior Chinatown, which was a winner of the 2020 National Book Award. He has been nominated for two Writers Guild of America awards for his work on the HBO series Westworld. He has also written for shows on FX, AMC, and HBO. His fiction and nonfiction have appeared in The New Yorker, The New York Times, The Atlantic, among other publications. So we're so honored to have Charlie host this book club. Before I pass it over to him, I just want to ask that everyone check that their mics are turned off. Okay, and with that, Charlie, I'm going to pass it over to you. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Sarah. Thank you to the Asia Society New York and to Lily and the Writers Workshop and to all the moderators and everyone who's helping make tonight possible. And to all of you, I can see your faces, some of you. And that's okay if you don't want to show your face. I get that too. Maybe I won't show my face. Maybe I'll just go off video and talk to you as a disembodied voice. I am really happy to be here with you, sort of. I wish we could do this in person, but also, maybe we wouldn't have been able to, because probably I wouldn't have been able to fly out to New York. So I think that's been one neat feature of the last year, is getting to be part of conversations with readers and writers and people like all of you. It's this weird mix of public and private space. You are in my bedroom currently. So I'm usually a pretty compartmentalized person, and meaning I don't know. I think a lot about how I'm presenting myself, except for my blind spots, because then I don't really know that. But I think this year has made me try to relax that a little. Well, it's forced me to. You can only be so compartmentalized when you are constantly talking to strangers from your bedroom. And I think that makes for a really interesting segue into the book, which is about, I think, on some level, private and public spaces, or front stage and backstage. I think, Willis Wu and the other background Asians of Chinatown, of this Chinatown, do live a kind of dual life. They perform their roles in their and they perform their identities, and then they have whole lives that have nothing to do with that. And that fluidity and sort of slippery boundary is what I was interested in writing the book. It's the script format is really kind of what helped me figure that out, because for a long time I was trying to write a more straightforward narrative, and it just wasn't working. And when I kind of stumbled on this form is when a whole bunch of interesting things started happening, I think, for me, structurally, conceptually, and just on a sentence level. I started to free up a little bit and have fun. And I guess in a way I started to sort of loosen my rigid, thinking about the compartments. I started to just write. And when I can get to that place, which is not very often, it happens approximately once every 5 to 7 years, apparently, then it's fun. It was actually fun writing the book for about 8 weeks. And then it was terrible, because then my editor and agent started telling me all the things I had to fix about it. Um, that was less fun, but just as important. Um, they asked a lot of questions that made me angry and frustrated and want to give up, but also they were pretty good questions, turns out, and helped me sometimes fix something that wasn't working, and other times have to articulate why it was working and they just weren't seeing it yet, or explain what it is I was trying to get across, which was a really illuminating process for me. It was really rewarding, but in the moment, there was a lot of, gnashing of teeth and wanting to give up. So, and the result was, a book that I was really, I had really was what I wanted to write, mostly at the time anyway, and also at the same time was terrified of what was going to happen, because it's written as a screenplay or a script. It's in second person, and there are lists of like federal statutes and state laws, and I just like, who's going to want to read this? And it turns out I was mostly right. Nobody really wanted to read it at first. I mean, people reviewed it, a few people, and it got a pretty good reception. And then I was lucky enough to, get recognized by the National Book Foundation, which was great, and also brought a lot of readers to the book. So it's been a really weird time to have had published this book, considering what else is going on in the world, everything. But it's also been one of the most exciting and challenging times to try to talk about it in the environment we're in on many levels. So, I really look forward to hearing what everyone else thinks. I'm really, as I was telling the moderators before, I'm pretty tired of listening to myself talk. I'm definitely want to hear what you all think, and look forward to the discussion. So thanks again for having me.
Thank you so much, Charlie. Thank you. We already have an interesting sneak peek. It's to hear about your writing process and then kind of the ideas between interior, exterior. So that was an awesome way to get us started with these breakout room discussions. So thank you for sharing that. So now we are going to go into the breakout rooms. So the process for this is that you'll receive an invite that'll pop up on your screen, and it'll say that you're being invited to a breakout room. If you click accept, you'll automatically be placed into a breakout room. And we are still working out the math to see if we will have one moderator in each room, but upon getting in there, your moderator will introduce themselves. So if you don't have a moderator, we're going to drop a reading guide into the chat, and there it is. So you can go ahead and use that as a jumping off point if you need. It's just there as an extra resource. And once we start those discussions, we'll have about 30 minutes for that. And before dividing into these groups, we will post some community agreements on the screen. So we ask that you please review those before joining a group, so that we can collectively uphold these agreements as we enter discussion. So again, just to recap, in a few minutes, it'll take a few minutes, you'll get an invite to join a group. If you click accept, you'll be placed into a breakout room group. And if you have any questions about this, maybe you feel that you don't want to join a breakout room group for whatever reason, or you have another question about the process, you can direct message me via the chat, and I'm happy to answer any questions. Okay, until then, Oscar, could you go ahead and share the community agreement slide, and you should be receiving an invite in a few minutes. Thank you. Welcome back to the main room. I hope you all had incredible discussions, and I can't wait to jump into the Q&A with Charlie. But before I do, I wanted to just express a huge thank you to all of our moderators for all of the time and energy they dedicated to their role and for holding space for discussion tonight. And our moderators come from a range of affiliations with either the Asia Society or the Asian American Writers Workshop. So we wanted to do a shout out to them and wanted to share links to their work. So we will be dropping information about all moderators in the chat, and we encourage you to reach out and continue conversations that started today. So again, thank you to all of our moderators. And with that, we are going to now start the Q&A portion of the event. Because we are organized as a large meeting here, we're going to ask that everyone keep their mics off and then drop any questions that they may have into the chat. And then I will then choose questions from the chat to ask Charlie. So please feel free to share also what may have been discussed in your breakout room group. I have found that with past events, people are very interested to hear what others spoke about. So if you want to share that, please feel free to do that as well. Okay, so let's wait a few moments until the questions start coming in. Okay, and we already have one actually. Okay, great. So Charlie, are you there? Did you make it back to the main room?
Yes, I think I'm here. Where am I? Am I?
Interior Zoom.
Right.
Okay, I'm glad that you made it back. Okay, so I'm gonna just go ahead and start with a question that we received from a moderator. They in their breakout room discussed the effectiveness of the screenplay format, how it surprised us at first and was so exciting. They felt entertained by the satire while also feeling deeply moved by the story. We wondered what were the changes / compromises made to accommodate the publishing industry. We also wanted to ask, have you had to create / write Asian characters based on racist Hollywood stereotypes due to pressures in the industry? Okay, so those are two questions. Maybe we'll start with the first one, which are, did you have to make any changes, compromises to accommodate the publishing industry?
Yes. I guess the short answer is yes, in that my editor and agent are part of the publishing industry, and they were deeply involved in kind of a macro and a micro level of shaping it. But it was a conversation, it was, I don't know that I could exactly enumerate, there were times where I felt like they were asking for things that I resisted. For instance, one specific suggestion was make much more of the love story. And initially I resisted that. Part of it was that I thought that could pull focus away from what I felt was the heart of the book, which was, well, I don't know what the heart of the book was. That was part of the issue is, I think, the book is what it is now, but at some point it was a much more amorphous thing. And I hadn't yet articulated some of the things that I think are a bit clearer in the final book. So I felt like, what they really want is more Karen, that through this point of view, this is a more interesting and maybe appealing point of view than Willis. And so that worried me, to be honest. I thought, no, this is the same thing that's always happening specifically to Asian male characters, is that they are not the protagonist. And so it turned out the ask wasn't what I thought. I think I was having a kind of knee-jerk visceral reaction, an insecurity on my part that I wouldn't be able to defend the story. And I think that was the wrong point of view. I think it evolved into something that worked much better. But that was a worry I had. And it's still something that I think about now in terms of, would they have asked that if Willis wasn't Willis? I don't know. And I try, and this is all this, I mean, I should preface this all that I trust my editors and my agent more than anyone. I don't think that they had any aim in trying to make the book more commercial or trying to make the book, I mean, other than, of course, they wanted to sell. I think they only wanted what was best, or they wanted to help me achieve what I was trying to achieve. And yet, can there be an unconscious bias? Maybe.
Right. Thank you for sharing that process that you had with your editors and publishing team. I wondered, and this group also spoke about this in relation to that. Did you have any pressures from the Hollywood industry to write or create Asian characters based on racist Hollywood stereotypes?
The short answer is no. I mean, I think I've been lucky enough to be working in a time and on shows and for people that would never ask that explicitly. I think we're past that. I think the way that I've experienced, my experiences so far have been, people generally bring a lot of, sensitivity, or at least attempts at being aware to the conversation. The one thing that I've had a couple of times is there's an Asian character and the story gravitates to that Asian character's cultural heritage. That is kind of a default, or just there's a gravity for some reason. We're always moving towards that in the room. And I voiced that. Basically, I voiced my desire to say, what if we didn't send this character back to their home country? What if this character just, is having problems with their significant other, or is a jerk, it doesn't have to go on a search for their motherland or whatever, so, I mean, nothing wrong with that. I mean, I wrote this book, but I have had that conversation a couple of times.
Right, kind of like the typical stories or kind of stereotypes for the Asian character. I feel like this relates to one of the sections in the book where you wrote, there's just something about Asians that make reality a little too real, overcomplicates the clarity, the duality, the clean elegance of black and white, the proven template. And so the decision is made not in some overarching conspiracy to exclude Asians, but because it's just easier to keep it how we have it. So I feel like when you were talking about, maybe not, when you were talking about kind of like this return to homeland story, that again is kind of this clear or kind of typical thing that is expected of Asians, and how that also relates to this duality of black and white. So then where does the Asian story fit in, and how do you see that relating to black and white?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And I'll try to take it piecemeal and not be too long-winded. Although there's always a danger of that with me. I mean, I think where does the Asian story fit in? I think, I guess, everywhere, is the short answer. It's like, it's like I have a desire as a viewer and as a writer to have both Asian stories that are about things that have to do with being Asian or having an Asian heritage and being in America. I also have a desire, as we were just talking about, to have stories that have Asian people in them and have nothing to do with being of any particular ethnicity or nationality. So I want there to be a huge plurality of Asian stories, and I want them to not fit into any kind of, any kind of framework anymore. And for those stories to just be what they are, so that, and I think there's progress being made, but in the most crass Hollywood terms, it's like, okay, cop show, or doctor show, and like, what's the Asian version of that movie, or what's the Asian version of that show, or what happens when we stick an Asian as one of those characters, or what if we move this and set it here. That's like 1.0 or 2.0, whatever. I think 1.0 is just get an Asian on the screen that's not, a stereotype. 2.0 is maybe sort of where we're at now, where you see them, great. The reality is breaking down a little bit. I mean, TV reality is breaking down a little bit, and Asians seem to be somewhat more integrated into TV society now, but not really. I mean, there still seems to be a dearth of Asians in places where you would expect to see them, like, say, in a hospital, or there are still plenty of places where Asian characters play a specific kind of role, even if it's not a stereotypical role. But yeah, I feel like the next thing is just, hopefully we're not thinking about it's like, oh, I didn't realize that director was Asian, or I didn't realize that that was, a story written by an Asian person. That it's just, maybe we can get there, I guess. I don't know if I answered your question, but I think I ran out of time.
No, you did. No, you did. And actually, another group, they kind of spoke about this topic as well, and they described it as a tricky tension between dreaming of a world where Asian Americans are fully American versus leaning into one's racialized identity as manifest in this very book club, the celebration of this book, Willis's journey in the book, Asian American Heritage Month, etc. And they go on to write, none of these things would happen in this, quote, pure, quote, more innocent world where Phoebe isn't racialized. So how do you think of that tension? The tension of like the Asian Americans wanting to feel fully American versus leaning into one's racialized identity.
Yeah, I love that. I wish I had said that instead. Good job, group, whatever group you are. Um, um, I think it is a tension. I don't know. I think I feel pulled by both sides of it. And yet I don't feel like that's a problem. I feel like that's actually maybe a positive tension to have a, not a contradiction, but almost like, it's almost as if by tension we're presupposing that you have to have one or the other, or that there's something zero sum about it. It's like, why can't we have both? It's yeah, that, I think that's what I mean. That why can't we have both? I who is saying it? I read something. I shouldn't even say it because I'm not going to be able to attribute it, but it's so good. It might have been an essay or a tweet. It maybe Minjin Lee. I don't know. I read it recently. Gosh, this is terrible. But it was someone talking to their parent, and like, who had immigrated, and like, my parents had lived here for a really long time. My parents have been here for over 50 years now, and then the child was like, referring to their parent as wherever they're from, like Korea or China, and they're like, why don't you ever say I'm an American? And it's true. It's like I still think of my dad as being from Taiwan, and I wrote it in the book that he's been an American longer than Willis has. That Willis is dad, and yet I never call my dad American. Like, he's definitely an American. Like, I don't know. There's a huge tension if even like someone who's writing a whole book about this uh, still gets confused about it.
Right, right. And I'm glad that you brought up Willis's father, and because another group also talked about kind of the gut punch reactions they had to the book. And for me personally, I felt that all of the relationships between Willis and his father, and then Willis and his daughter, were especially emotional, and they really moved me. So this group is wondering if you could speak more about the generational sense of belonging, and how that was manifested through these various familial relationships.
Yeah. Thank you. Uh, our group also talked about that, and I have to say, for our group, I I honestly like almost cried a couple of times. So set the bar pretty high for your other groups. I don't know if anyone else almost cried, but I yeah, I think that um, yeah, I don't know. I'm fumbling here for like a concise way to say it. I mean, the someone said it in our group, this kind of vast gulf between the generations that it can be felt. Um, I think it might have been Courtney who said it, but it really captured something that I have felt and tried to write about, both in this book and other things that I've written. Um, and yet on some level, I personally feel that it's, an unbridgeable gulf, and yet it should be the closest distance in the world in a way. It's like the person right next to you, or, when my kids are with my parents, we're looking at three generations where it's, if you just like step back and think about how incredible it is that there's really only two generations separating, you know, and how different their lives are, how different the cultures are, and yet um, it's all so compressed, and we're all so close. I, again, maybe that's a different kind of tension, that feeling of like, we should be so much closer. I want to be closer to you. How can I? I think about that sometimes, especially in the last year when I haven't been able to see my parents. I just have this deep ache of like, of feeling all the things that normally I can alleviate by just going to see them, even if it's just sort of like a cursory visit sometimes. um yeah, I've become so much more sensitive to that, of so many things that they probably want to tell me or think I don't understand, and or things that I want to say to them. I don't know. Now I'm rambling.
No, not rambling at all. Um, Kind of in what you were mentioning about this wide gulf between generations brought me to a specific passage in the novel when you were speaking about Willis and his father, and how in those visits they have to stick to a script. Otherwise, it becomes, like too overwhelming, too raw. So I was wondering, kind of like of the device of the script and these roles in also these generational relationships, and how that kind of manifests in the book, kind of sticking to these scripts or these roles. And sometimes they're like tender and heartbreaking, and why are we sticking to them?
Yeah, I before we started, Lily asked me, what's one question that I wish I'd gotten more. I think you just asked one that I really love talking about this, and I don't get to talk about it that much, because I think it's not just the script format as a screenplay, and there's, fun and interesting stuff that works there for the story and for the kind of performance aspect of performative, I don't know, racialized identity, right? But you're hitting on something, Sarah, that I think is really what gets to the heart of it, is the performance, even in these roles, even in the sometimes formality, or the whatever it is that keeps us from, and I think we see it a lot with Willis, with especially his dad, between his dad and his mom. There's a slightly different kind of communication. I think with his dad, it feels like safer, and actually it's more expected, and it's probably it just feels riskier to be straying off of the role for Willis. And for his mom, there's a bit more, it's a bit more intimate, and it's a bit more casual how they can communicate at times. I think it's something that I really was trying to get at, in terms of like, how do you, two things, I guess. One, how do you get past that final distance? Like, are there moments where it just finally breaks down and you're really not performing? And two, should there be? I mean, do those roles even still play an important part of even a parent-child relationship? Even the most fundamental relationship, is there still something to this idea of like, I don't know, I'm supposed to be this, or I'm supposed to say this?
Right. Yeah, thank you for sharing the thinking of the multi-layered use of the script, and not only form, but also thinking about roles and identity. Yeah, that's really interesting to hear more about. And I wanted to touch on a question that came up in the chat. One of the groups shared memories of Chinatown in their breakout room, which was really beautiful and special, particularly now when so many of us haven't traveled or visited familiar places in so long. So this comment reminds me, this is an obvious thing, that all of these generational relationships, all of these parts are taking place in physical locations. And the combination of the role and where that role kind of evolves is so important. So I wanted to hear more about your thinking of Chinatown in this book, and any other thoughts about kind of the roles and where they take place, like the sense of place.
Yeah. That was the group I was in, and everyone just shared such, specific and like visceral memories, in some cases, of things that I forgot your question. It is about Chinatown, and like, what was I thinking, and how did that connect to like physical place in the construction of this Chinatown?
Yes. Kind of like how does a physical place and the idea of Chinatown, like the connection between these roles and characters evolving in specific places, and specifically Chinatown.
Yeah, I think, I think it was weird because there was two ingredients basically. It was like memories I'd had growing up, some of the stories from my wife's family, and my wife telling me about her experiences. So I sort of had like just little bits and things that I thought were neat, and I wanted to find a way to, steal from life and write it into fiction. And then I had a bunch of ideas about what the representations of Chinatown on screen, and of not just Chinatown, but of Asians in America. You know, to what that, and those two things felt like they should go together. I didn't know exactly how they would interact, and I think the kind of first eureka moment was to put them together in this fake show, right? To say the nexus of the actual personal experience and these stereotyped ideas is the Chinese restaurant, because one, everyone in America has probably been to a Chinese restaurant. I don't know what percent, but it's got to be like 90% at least. Um, and also everyone's seen Chinese restaurants in TV and movies probably. So, and it just felt like, oh, that is a physical place that also represents something pretty major in like the American kind of cultural space too, whatever that means. I don't know, that just sounds like I made that up, but it does feel like a place in your mental landscape. Like I've been to that Chinese restaurant. I know what he's describing, you know, and yeah, I think that was the core of it. In fact, like the first title of the book was Interior Golden Palette. Not the first title, but when I kind of came on this version of the book, that's what I was calling it for a while, because I thought really that the restaurant was the center of it all.
Right. Yeah, thanks for sharing more of the thinking behind the place of Chinatown. And it kind of brings me to one of the questions that came up in the chat of like, you mentioned that Chinatown, like a lot of people will have an association with Chinatown, whatever it might be. It could be, you know, very broad across ranges of experience with it or in associations. But how did you think about writing for an Asian and also non-Asian audiences and their relations to Chinatown?
Yeah, I don't know. I did think about it. Um, I guess I thought that I wanted it to both be specific enough that if you have happened to share some of this background, or you'd pick up on certain things, that those would resonate. But I didn't want it to close off. You know, I wanted very much, the idea was, let's bring all kinds of readers into Willis Wu's head. Like that's really what I wanted when I first like started writing this version of the book. I just wanted to hear the voice of this character and be in this guy's head, and put the reader into his subjective consciousness. So I felt like if I could do that, then yeah, some people might really get a lot of the specifics, but it shouldn't really matter even if you don't get most of them, because the point is that you're now experiencing this guy as a human, the guy that normally is in the background.
Right, right. Yeah, thanks for sharing that. You definitely feel that tension throughout. One other group, and you know, we're approaching the end of our event, so I wanted to, you know, have this question. Maybe it might be our last, or it might be our second to last, but it's one that looks forward, which I think is, you know, helpful at this time. We all need hope right now. And this person said that they had a lot of teachers in their breakout room group, and they were trying to persuade them to teach Interior Chinatown in their classes, including to as young as high schoolers. Has this book been assigned for any curriculum? Is the first question. And then the secondly is, relatedly, do you feel hopeful for the younger generation? And is that what you're trying to convey with Phoebe Wu's storyline?
Thanks. I am aware of some places it has been assigned, university and college level, high school. I even heard that from a friend actually that his eighth grader is reading it, which is, and I have an eighth grader. I have an eighth grader and a sixth grader. So I thought how mad my kids would be if they could assign my work anytime in the next few years. So yeah, I think it is being assigned. I've talked to some schools about it, and yeah, I just talked to actually two ninth grade classes, and and I'm like a goldfish because you had a second part of your question. I've already forgotten it. I'm sorry.
No, no worries. Please don't be sorry. The second question was, do you feel hopeful for the younger generation? And is that what you were trying to convey with Phoebe Wu's storyline?
Um, I think, yeah, I am a, you know, closet optimist. I think I have probably an unreasonable amount of hope, but you wouldn't know it necessarily by listening to my conversations that I have with my wife. I mean, I think I, I guess what I am in a way is like a someone. I deep down believe that like we don't know what the reason for hope's really going to be. Like that it's. I just assume that something is going to come in and upend everything that we're thinking. Uh, Whatever that means, both in terms of social institutions, in terms of, racial justice, in terms of technology. I just still have hope that actually, despite all of the things that are rotten about us and about the things that we do to each other, there's a lot of ingenuity, and there is actually like a lot of people that are thinking about how to solve other people's problems and care for other people. And when I step back and think about like the tone of this conversation, the substance of the conversation we're having, which I don't know that like the parameters of this conversation were even imaginable just a few years ago. Like when I feel like it's just so much, yeah, I feel a lot of hope. And I think I have to because of my kids, but I actually do. So. And yes, I was thinking about that with Phoebe for sure.
Well, we need hope right now. So, yeah, thanks for sharing more about what you're hopeful for. And I we have so many questions here. I'm not going to get to all of them. I feel bad. But one thing that I heard, and I was wondering if you are able to speak about this, is the book being adapted into a TV show? Because that would give us more hope.
It shouldn't give you hope. It should cause fear because it causes fear in me. It is. I am writing a pilot for Hulu. It doesn't necessarily mean that they will air it, or shoot it, but they have been really supportive and encouraging, and so that's exciting and difficult. And I don't know how many people want to stick around. I will try to be less wordy if you want to get through a few more questions, but I also want to be mindful of everyone's time.
Yeah, sure. Oh my gosh, there's so many good ones. Okay, I will go for this one. This person is saying, I'm thinking of roles we play in intimate relationships and how a role is something that gives us meaning or allows us to contribute. Do you think the United States could learn from a version of roles that is not just limiting and scripted, but denotes reliability between people?
Hmm. That is a complex question that I will answer not glibly, but concisely. I think that's a super interesting idea. I haven't thought about it as applying to whole countries, but I do think that there's something to a mindset that, that there's, yeah, if someone wants to go and, give a seminar to our government officials about Irving Goffman and about decentralizing roles and things like that, yeah, that'd be cool.
I agree. I agree. I think that we need that. And we have a lot of artists here. I know we have a lot of storytellers. I think that there are a lot of people thinking about this. So that's amazing. Okay, so I will leave the last question to one asked by Jane de Beauvois. We have been inspired by Interior Chinatown and by your creativity. And Jane is wondering what authors or books have been inspiring you.
Ooh. Ooh. Inspiring. Thank you, Jane, for the question. Gosh. Um, I always freeze up on this question. I loved Kathy Park Hong's book, Minor Feelings. Um, I I loved how much of these hills is gold. Um, uh, and I am trying to think of what else. I can't say any fiction that's been written this year because I'm a judge for an award, so I'm not supposed to plug any fiction, but I am getting to read a lot of good fiction. Um, so yeah, and I what else am I reading? No, I guess that's it. So that's that was not a very good answer, but
No, that was great, and I love that you mentioned Kathy Park Hong's book because we actually gathered our first virtual book club around Minor Feelings. So it's a nice tie-in, a nice connection to make to this virtual book club. And I think that is, unfortunately, we're out of time. I didn't get to all the questions. I apologize about that, but thank you so much for joining us this evening. I want to do a huge thanks to Charlie. We're so excited to have had you host this book club. I want to thank all of our moderators and all of our partners. It was really a collective effort and truly a amalgamation of all these people coming together with their time and energy. And lastly, to all the participants, thank you so much for being here. And if you are interested in getting involved in a future virtual book club as a moderator, or if you have any feedback about tonight's event, we totally welcome that. And I'll drop an email into the chat.